What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Well, Mike Hazen has been in the kitchen cooking as the D-backs sign Corbin Burnes to a new franchise record-breaking deal.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please just follow my personal at CreatorThomas24 for the personal account. Look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram, for the podcast show handle, so you can follow us online on social media as well. And don't forget, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Well, today's Saturday, so we don't typically do podcasts on Saturday, so there must have been big news, right, for me to stop my holiday break. I've been relaxing with the family. There had to be big news for me to hop on the mic, hop back on the camera, and there was. Middle of the night, D-backs signed Corbin Burnes to a franchise record-breaking deal. Yeah, we had to fire up the mics Saturday, so that's what we're discussing on today's podcast. The reaction, the fallout to Burnes coming to the D-backs, how the rotation stacks up against the rest of the National League, and future moves for what's going to happen next. So thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and it's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the podcast and let's discuss our reaction and the fallout from Corbin Burnes going to the D-backs, because it was like 1:30 a.m. out here on the East Coast. I see the Jeff Passan bomb. I see first Corbin Burnes in the money. I'm like, oh, where is he signing, right? And then you keep reading the tweet and you're like, the Arizona Diamondbacks. There's not many transactions in sports that make me actually feel completely and utterly shocked. There's only a few times, especially when it comes to like teams that I'm personally rooting for, right? I think other times I felt this way was like when Steve Nash got traded to the LA Lakers. Like that was a major moment. Even when it was like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard going to the Clippers, like I was shocked. Felt like the earth was shaking. It felt like there was a massive earthquake going around the NBA when like transactions like that happened, because of how it affected the sport and just like the disbelief of like it came out of nowhere, right? I think it's the fact that some of those deals were just so underreported and you just never really expected it to happen. I think that's where a lot of people are coming from with this Corbin Burnes to the D-backs, because a lot of people are saying this is the most shocking, biggest surprise move of the offseason. And I think it will be all offseason, because Juan Soto to the Yankees, yes, it was a little bit surprising, but we know the Mets were going to be in on Juan Soto all offseason. Like there was always traction there. Like none of these big free agents that we saw, none of it's really surprising that they, the Braves, Max Fried went to another big market in the Yankees. Like that's not surprising. You know what is surprising? Corbin Burnes, the best pitcher on the market that had no rumors, no discussions with the D-backs, apparently prior to the last 3 to 4 days, because allegedly this all came together in the last like 72 hours to like 96 hours. D-backs had no prior discussions really with Corbin Burnes, and there were other teams out there offering Burnes more money. He could have went to the NL West rival San Francisco Giants, who are apparently offering him more annually per year. Same with the Orioles, same with the Toronto Blue Jays. But for Burnes, he wanted to come play in Arizona, not just because of the franchise and the roster, but also because of personal reasons that sometimes we don't take into effect when discussing players. These are real people. These are humans too. And it sounds like the main motivating factor for Burnes picking Arizona and turning down more money, potentially more years on the table, is because him and his wife just had twins and they live in Scottsdale. They live in Arizona. So Burnes is just saying, I want to stay home. And the fact that Arizona has great income taxes actually swayed his decision a lot. And now the D-backs are giving out a new franchise record breaking deal. Previously, it was held by Zach Greinke, 6 years, 206. Now it's 6 years, 210 for Corbin Burnes. D-backs cried poor all offseason with guys like Christian Walker, Jock Peterson leaving. Still don't understand how we weren't able to really pony up the money for them. But considering we're giving Corbin Burnes this deal, I'm not too upset. Obviously, we're now prioritizing pitching over offense, but you're getting arguably a top 5 pitcher in the sport now to come join your rotation. And he's being fairly compensated for it. You get the 6 years, 210, but those first 2 years of the deal, full no trade clause for Corbin Burnes if the D-backs for some reason want to trade him. He can also opt out after those first 2 years. But what's interesting about this Burnes deal is there is more incentive for him to stay because even though he can opt out after the first 2 years, the deal is backloaded. He only makes 30 million annually the first 2 years and then 150 the last 4. And so if he opts in, he'll end up getting more money on the back end, but he will lose his no trade clause. And so there's a little bit of give and take. Overall, I really like the structure of this deal because he could ball out for the next 2 seasons and then leave and go somewhere else. And that would be okay. If he helps the D-backs get a World Series in the next 2 years, like you would be fine with him leaving after that point. And maybe he's not. Maybe he thinks he could get more money on the market, and we're like, you know what? He's just too expensive. We can't afford the contract that Corbin Burnes wants, so it's better to just let him go instead of us trying to re-sign him for even more money when he's a little bit older. So I love the fact that he has an opt-out after 2 years because I think it can help both sides unless he's just Jordan Montgomery the next 2 years and then he opts back into the deal. Yeah, that would make D-backs fans feel terrible if he's a terrible pitcher on a bad contract. If he's mad bum making the money that the D-back just gave him, like, yeah, that would make us feel really, really bad. But I don't really have in terms of the risk of Corbin Burnes, I don't think it's that high. I definitely don't think it's Mad Bum level high. Maybe it's like Zach Greinke level in terms of risk, but Corbin Burnes has been an elite pitcher in baseball for quite some time now. He has the second best ERA and the second most strikeouts since the start of 2021. It's basically like him, Fried, and Zach Wheeler, like all on the same like kind of plane. He also has really strong postseason numbers, which I don't think enough people discuss because when the Yankees signed Max Fried, I talked about how Max Fried has been a terrible postseason pitcher, and you just can't overlook that. Clayton Kershaw is the greatest regular season pitcher I've ever seen. But if I saw Clayton Kershaw in a postseason setting, I'm going to bet on my team to beat the Dodgers because Kershaw is a terrible postseason pitcher. And Fried might keep that trend up in 2025. We'll see. But at least for Corbin Burnes, 27 innings pitched in his postseason career, a 2.33 ERA. This past year with Baltimore, 8 innings, 84 pitches, and only 1 earned run. That's fantastic. Corbin Burnes has only one like kind of bad outing in his postseason career, and that was against the D-backs in 2023. And so when you're talking about the risk for Corbin Burnes, does it slightly give Zach Greinke vibes considering like the money's very similar between those two dudes? Yes, but if you tell me Burnes ends up being Zach Greinke, I don't think that's that negative of a connotation. I think we forget how good Greinke actually was in Arizona. That first season, he was not that effective. 4.37 ERA, definitely didn't look like the guy that we were signing because he finished runner-up in Cy Young voting and then comes to the D-backs and has a 4.37 ERA. Not good. But the next 3 years, he was a 200-inning guy, around a 3 ERA, and he looked like elite Zach Greinke again. He finished 4th in MVP voting his second season with Arizona. And so if you get a guy for, Greinke spent 3.5 seasons with Arizona, and you would say 2.5 of those seasons, he looked like a Cy Young top 5 pitcher in the sport. If Corbin Burnes for majority of this contract can look like a top 5 pitcher in the National League, I think we will all sign up for that deal. Greinke was not as bad as we remember with the D-backs. And if Corbin Burnes is somewhat similar to that, like, I'm not that mad. At the end of the day, Corbin Burnes is a tier 1 pitcher. He's a number one starter in baseball. This is not mad bum with the numbers in the decline, looking old in San Fran. Like, yes, the strikeout numbers might not be the same, doesn't have the same swing and miss rate Corbin Burnes does as he might have had back in 2021 when he won the Cy Young Award. But you look at the velo on his pitches, they were up in 2024 compared to 2023. Burnes is still a superstar, and adding him to an already deep rotation that includes Gallen, Kelly, Fott, Erod, Monty, and Nelson, absolutely insane. And that's why we'll discuss how the D-back starters in this rotation stack up against the rest of the National League in segment number 2. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called all-in pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, where we just discussed our reaction, some of the fallout from the Corbin Burnes deal, because I don't know if I've even been explicit in saying this, but I'm still in disbelief. Like I said, earthquake shattering news that we got back. I'm just in shock. I've been in so many different group chats and text messages just talking about it with my friends. Like, we just can't believe the D-backs of all teams, not just, they didn't really outbid these other teams, which is the craziest part. Like, the best pitcher on the market said, we'll turn down more money from teams like San Fran to go play in Arizona. We'll turn down more money from Baltimore, who we just spent a year in their city, to go play with Arizona. Like, stuff like that does not happen to the D-backs. And that's why we are still all, at least me, while I'm still in such all in shock and disbelief from this Corbin Burnes deal. And now you got to discuss the D-backs rotation going to next year, because D-backs clearly showing you a year after leading the league in runs scored, pitching is still king with the loaded lineups that the Dodgers have with Mookie and Freddie and Muncy and Betts and Ohtani and all these guys, Will Smith. You got the Phillies with Schwarber and Bryce Harper and Real Muto and Castellanos and Bohm. And you got the Padres with Tatis and Machado. And you got Jackson Merrill now. And you go up and down the National League, right? The Braves still have a fantastic lineup. Acuna should be healthy at some point next year. And I expect a big bounce back for a lot of those Braves hitters, like the Austin Rileys of the world. Mets now have, Juan Soto. That should really help out their lineup, right? You go up and down these NL teams, and there's some really strong lineups that you're going to have to compete with. And there's also some really strong rotations that you're going to have to compete with as well. And FanGraphs have been making their list of the best rotations, the most starting pitching depth in Major League Baseball. And when comparing the D-backs to some of these other teams in the sport, I like to think, or at least some of these other teams in the National League, I like to think with the addition now of Corbin Burnes, the D-backs have one of the deepest, if not the deepest rotation in the National League. And I kind of want to stack it up against those other NL rotations, because you look at the D-backs right now, and we can, even for this exercise, right, for comparing the D-backs rotations to the others in the NL, for this exercise, I'll even take Jordan Montgomery out of the exercise, out of the conversation, because it feels more than likely that the D-backs are going to trade Monty. They've been putting him on blast all offseason. It feels like they're definitely going to trade him at some point. So even with Monty out, your rotation of Burnes, Zach Allen, and Merrill Kelly as your top 3 is nasty. Then if you're talking about a playoff rotation, I think I would lean Brandon Pfaadt over Erod, considering I think Pfaadt is just one of those. I think he just has that moxie, just that confidence of a big game pitcher. Regular season wise, still might be hit or miss, but for some reason, you put him in the biggest games, and I trust Brandon Pfaadt. So right now, I would lean Pfaadt over Erod for that fourth spot in the rotation, but the fact that you could round out your rotation with both Fott and Erod is huge. And if Erod has a bounce back in 2025, like that's a major swing piece for the D-backs. And then your sixth starter is Ryan Nelson, who was your best starter for the last 13 starts of the season. Those last 83 innings pitched that he was the best D-back starter. He had like a 3.3 ERA during his last 13 starts, really strong. The fact that he's now our sixth starter, kind of like our Nick Martinez type, who could be a spot starter, long reliever. Like, I really like Ryan Nelson in that role, and potentially he could be the number 5 starter if someone like Erod is flat out terrible in 2025. And you still got guys in the wings, Tommy Henry, Christian Mena, Blake Walston, Yulber Diaz, guys who we have various feelings on in terms of what their ceiling, what their floor might be, but at least all 4 of those guys, we've seen flashes where they can step in and at least be solid and hold it down for a start or two. So when we look at the depth of this D-backs team just among their starters, I think there's only 2 teams in the National League that I would feel comfortable putting ahead of the D-backs. Now, according to Fangraphs, they have 4 teams ahead of the D-backs. At least in the National League, I only have 2. First one being the Philadelphia Phillies, Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Suarez, Luzardo. They just acquired Jesus Luzardo. I'll give you that rotation over the D-backs. The top 4 is coming off really strong seasons, especially when you compare it to Arizona. I think Jesus Luzardo, major swing piece for next year. I mean, he could be their number 3 starter. I think he's that talented. Really would have liked him in Arizona if we decide to trade Starling Marte for him, but that's a different story. And then the Dodgers, I would definitively put ahead of Arizona as well. Blake Snell, who they just signed, Yamamoto for a lot of money last season, then Glass now. Ohtani is definitely a better top 4 than the D-backs, and they also have insane depth with Tony Gonsolin, Dustin May, Landon Knack, Bobby Miller. Like, I have no qualms putting those 2 teams ahead of the D-backs, just like how Fangraphs did. But these other 2 teams, I don't know if I feel the same, because Fangraphs likes the rotation depths of both the Braves and the Pittsburgh Pirates more than Arizona. And I think there's a little bit of craziness when discussing that, because looking at the Atlanta Braves, I just feel like I have a lot of questions and there's a lot of risk. Chris Sale, undoubtedly a stud. But do you think in his mid 30s, after spending the last 4 or 5 seasons just on the infirmary table, always hurt, always injured? Like, can he have back-to-back fully healthy, full workload seasons after coming off a year where the Braves put so much on his plate? He definitely felt like he hit a little bit of a wall those last few weeks. Like, can he do it again in 2025? Like, I don't know. Spencer Strider not going to be ready for the start of the season. Like, what level is he going to be at next year? Max Fried is gone. I think Charlie Moore's going to be gone. I know Ronaldo Lopez and Schwallenbach were very good last year, but I just see a lot of risk in the Atlanta rotation. I'm not saying it can't be a top 5 rotation or better than the D-backs, but as it currently stands, I think there's less question marks with the D-backs compared to the Braves rotation. Then Pittsburgh Pirates, like, that rotation is being carried by Paul Skeens. Like, if you want to tell me Paul Skeens is the best pitcher between either of those 2 teams, I'm not going to argue with you. But if you did a rotation draft between the Pirates and the D-backs, Pirates would get the number 1 pick in Paul Skeens, and then D-backs would get Burnes, Gallen, and Kelly. And who knows, you might even take Fott and Erod over a Mitch Keller or a Jared Jones. Like, that's a conversation. But D-backs definitely get picks 2 through 4 in a draft between our 2 rotations. So that's why I also think it's a little bit crazy to have the Pirates above the D-backs in the National League. So in my opinion, after signing Corbin Burnes, the D-backs have at worst the 3rd best rotation in the National League, and that's still not even counting Jordan Montgomery. Like, there's still a world where Monty enters the season 2025 and you're trying to figure out, after our top 3, how do you fill out the number 4, number 5 spot between Brandon Pfaadt, who we've seen be an elite postseason pitcher, but up and down the regular season, Ryan Nelson, who had an incredible second half of last year, but can he do it for a full workload? Erod getting paid $60 million over the next 3 years. Does he have a bounce back in him? And then Jordan Montgomery, who is talent-wise has shown the highest ceiling of probably any of those pitchers, but also had the lowest floor of any of those pitchers in 2024. So major question marks for how the D-backs should and the back. It should round out the back end of the rotation, but love the fact that they have the depth. Love the ceiling of this rotation. Nasty top three. And the D-backs, after this Corbin Burnes signing, they're not going to be done. Like we've been saying, they're probably going to trade Jordan Montgomery next. And that's why we're going to discuss the moves that the D-backs are probably going to do next post Corbin Burnes signing. We'll discuss that in segment number 3. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. My favorite thing to do on the FanDuel Sportsbook app is the same game parlay. When I see that Arizona Cardinals are playing, sometimes I like to do a little Cardinals money line. Give me a little James Conner over on rushing touchdowns, and give me Kyler Murray anytime touchdown. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. So if you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss what might be next for the D-backs post Corbin Burnes signing, because there's a lot of options that the D-backs can still do, and there's still moves that the D-backs have to make because of this Burnes signing. Like, this is going to start a little bit of a domino chain reaction, more specifically for like the rotation, because the Burnes signing both has short-term and long-term implications. Because when we're talking about the short term, it definitely feels like Jordan Montgomery's out the door, right? We've discussed that the whole podcast, discussed that a lot this offseason. I mean, Ken Kendrick has gone on a media tour blasting Jordan Montgomery. We know the D-backs have been vocal about moving him. They've tried to move him, allegedly offered the Chicago Cubs Cody Bellinger for Jordan Montgomery, which I do think was a good deal. I would have been happy with at the time, but the fact that we traded Slade for Josh Naylor and we still have Jordan Montgomery is actually an even better deal. I think Belly's probably better than Naylor, but we could still flip Monty for like a different piece. And we gave up Slade at the end of the day, who was a previous first round pick by the D-backs, but was just horrendous last year. And I don't really have a lot of faith in him. So I like the fact that the D-backs can still trade Monty for a different piece, which could be very interesting. The only thing with Monty is I just don't know what kind of value he holds, because if Cody Bellinger didn't get it done, like, do you have to look lower? Like, are you looking for like, just like a young kind of prospect? If there's still someone like major league ready, like, would you trade Jordan Montgomery for like a Christian Mena type, like a nice prospect who's like the 15th best prospect in someone's organization, who is like borderline major league ready, or like a different kind of position player that kind of fits the same mold? Like, I don't know. I know one discussion that's been thrown out there that I've seen floated around a little bit is like, can you trade Jordan Montgomery for a Spencer Torkelson? Because of course the D-backs still need a right-handed bat, and that discussion has just been floating like on Twitter a little bit. Like, of course, since the Tigers have signed Gleyber Torres, they've talked about Colt Keith going to first base, middle infielder being Gleyber and Javier Baez. And it's like, oh, we'll figure out a role for Spencer Torkelson. You'll find the DH or something. Like, they just seem very non-committal about where Spencer's going to play. And for the D-backs, they need a backup first baseman to Naylor, who's a right-handed complement, which would be nice. And they just need a right-handed DH overall. Spencer went to ASU, could be a little homecoming. Like, he's had a 30 home run season before, a lot of flaws in his game, but there's still a lot of talent for the previous #1 pick and under club control for a few more years. That's probably the biggest reason why the deal doesn't happen. But if it was a possibility, I would definitely welcome Spencer for Jordan Montgomery, no doubt. And even if the Tigers didn't want to make that move, even if they thought that was a bad deal, I still think there's a team out there that wants to take a one-year flyer on Jordan Montgomery. Like, this was a guy just 2 seasons ago was a frontline starter for the World Series champion. I know he had a bad 2024, but there are definitely worst guys you could take a 1-year flyer on, especially if the D-backs decide to kick in a little bit of money, right? Like, you look at around some of the pitchers in Major League Baseball who are getting similar contracts to Monty. Like, Monty's getting 25 this year. Giolito's getting 19. Severino's like 23. Kikuchi's like 22. Manaya's 25. Like, you tell me if all of them are at their absolute best, Jordan Montgomery's not the best of those pitchers, and they're all around the same money. Like, I know Monty's coming off a terrible year, but I think I would rather take the 1-year flyer on Monty as opposed to giving Kikuchi 22 plus a year for the next 3 years. Same with Severino, Giolito off the Tommy John. Like, give me Monty at his money at that point. But if I'm actually being honest about what the D-backs should do with their rotation depth situation, I actually would keep Jordan Montgomery and I would trade Eduardo Rodriguez. I think it's actually better to keep Monty, considering he just a 1-year deal, expiring contract, and trade the guy who is getting 60 million over the last 3 years. Like, Erod is getting 20 million annually, and he was just as bad as Monty this past year. And the thing about Erod too, he's a guy whose health is always a major question mark. And so much rather that long-term money of Erod come off the books in 2025 along with Monty, who's a pending free agent. You can have both of them come off your books next season. And now all of a sudden, you have all this money to play with because right now, everyone is saying a major reason why the D-backs signed Corbin Burnes is because he's insurance for when Zach Gallen tests the free agent market in 2025 and ultimately decides to leave. But if we didn't have Erod or Monty's books, if we didn't have Erod or Monty's money on the books for next season, then why wouldn't we have enough at that point to re-sign Zach Gallen? Yes, he still might, of course, command a lot of money, but I feel like he'll be closer annually to the Rodons and Freeds, which is like 27, 28 a year, than the Corbin Burnes, who's like 35. And so if you could sign Zach Gallen to whatever a 6-year, 28 million a year contract is, like basically give him the Tyler Glass now contract with Corbin Burnes, bring back Merrill Kelly and Brandon Pfaadt and Ryan Nelson, and like that's your top 5 rotation. That's your core going forward. Like, I don't know why we have to keep Erod and then let Zach Allen go next offseason. Like, why can't we figure out a way where both Monty's and Erod's money comes off the books in 2025 and then we re-sign Zach Gallen? That is my dream scenario, but right now it does not feel that likely, sadly. And then according to Gambo of Arizona Sports, D-backs, of course, still linked to some relievers. We talked about Ryan Hesley from the St. Louis Cardinals a bunch, but also Kirby Yates, who we've discussed. Gambo said the D-backs are still interested. And also Pete Fairbranks. Like, if the D-backs get any 3 of those relievers, I think this would be a fantastic offseason. Of course, Christian Walker and Jock Peterson leaving really sucks. Mostly Walker leaving hurts more than anything, but getting Josh Naylor, 27 versus 34-year-old Christian Walker. The age is huge, and he's coming off a really productive power season. So it makes me feel like you could at least be 90% of Christian Walker offensively. You signed the best pitcher in the sport in Corbin Burnes to now build this nasty rotation that could hopefully slow down some of the best offenses in the National League. And you still have to match up against some of these best rotations in the National League, right? It's not just about slowing down the Dodgers and the Phillies, but also if the Dodgers are throwing out Ohtani or Glass now in like a game 3 or game 4, like, yeah, having Merrill Kelly and then either Brandon Pfaadt or Monty or Erod to also match in those game 3s or game 4s goes a long, long way. So a weird offseason for the D-backs when we think about some of the guys we've lost, but also a great offseason when we think about some of the guys we brought in. Come back later in this week where we discuss why the Corbin Burnes contract is actually the best among the top tier pitchers this offseason. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Joseph.